Welcome back to the Kriya Yoga podcast, the infinite season. Today we're going to do an experimental podcast that I'd like your feedback on. Every month for the Kriya Yoga online Patreon community, the community that supports this podcast, I offer a monthly lesson. And sometimes those lessons turn into much larger courses. For example, we've done a course on the primordial powers of creation, the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And as of now, we're currently going through the yamas and niyamas. And each month, I'm leading these meditations that help you contemplate the yamas and niyamas, but also to learn to feel them, to embody them, to make them real within your life and within your experience. And so I have an idea for another series of classes. Again, this is for the Kriya Yoga online Patreon community. And that series is going to focus on the essential principles of the yoga of enlightenment. And those principles are going to come primarily from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. We're going to focus on those terms in the Yoga Sutras that if we can understand them, if we can grasp them, if we can gain a sense of what they are, we have a much better possibility, a much better chance of authentically experiencing the inner transformations that lead to an enlightened perspective. Now, this particular podcast is an experiment because a lot of the terminology in the Yoga Sutras is abstract and can be difficult to grasp. And that's mainly because a lot of these terms in Sanskrit, they don't have a correlation in English. And my Kriya Yoga teacher, Roy Eugene Davis, a student of Paramahansa Yogananda, he did not encourage his teachers to spend a whole lot of time going down the rabbit hole of Sanskrit descriptions or translations. He always told us that it's really better to try to explain these terms in the language that we know and in the language of the people that we're speaking to. And I know you've heard me attempt to try to define these Sanskrit terms in other podcasts or in other classes, even on retreat. But my goal here is to really look at each essential word within the Yoga Sutras, but specifically to help encourage your direct experience of the process. So I'm going to aim to find a way to discuss these terms, to even experience these terms, so that your yoga meditation practice is enlivened. So it's not just simply an academic discussion or a dry conversation on philosophy that doesn't really help you out very much. Essentially, I think that's what Roy Eugene Davis, my teacher, was trying to avoid, because there are a lot of people out there who can learn Sanskrit terms, can learn the language, but don't have a capacity to share the experience of it. So this is my attempt to remedy that. And as we go through our discussion today, reflect upon what you hear, see if it's helpful for you, and let me know if you feel it'd be useful to continue the process of looking at these terms, exploring the possibility of understanding these terms, again, step by step, word by word. And the term that we're going to explore today is Nirodha. Nirodha. This is an essential term from that defining sutra, Yogaś, citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ, which can be translated as yoga is the ending or the ceasing of those fluctuations within the field of consciousness, within the mind. And many people use this word nirodha, but what does it actually mean? How do you know when you are experiencing nirodha? And this idea of nirodha, this reality of nirodha, it is essential for yoga to do what it's supposed to do. Nirodha has to happen, has to be engaged in order for the process of yoga to lessen those afflictions, those things which cause us pain, which make us feel like we're simply a little human being with a personality and a body that's going to eventually die or perish. It's through the practice of nirodha that we gain a direct vision, a direct experience of what we are as a soul, as the seer, as an expression of Ishvara, or God, as it's often translated. But what does it mean that nirodha is that process which brings about the ending or the cessation of the fluctuations within the field of consciousness? Now, the difficulty with this process is that we're going to have to learn many different words, many different terms, separately, and then put them together so that they make sense. So right now I'm talking about nirodha, but we also need to understand what the word citta is and what the word vritti is. For example, citta is often translated as the mind. I personally like to translate citta as the field of our being or the field of our awareness. And vritti is often translated as a fluctuation, or it's imagined to be a wave on this field of citta, or a wave in the field of our experience. So for now, you'll have to just go with that as the terminology, as the definition of these other two ideas. But as you can imagine, we could spend whole episodes, whole classes on those two terms alone. But back to nirodha. Nirodha is the lessening of those fluctuations within the field of consciousness. Well, how does it happen? Nirodha occurs through practice of your meditation and through practice of your yogic techniques. So it occurs through the application of your mantra, or the application of your pranayama, or your devotion. And there are phases, or nirodha functions on a spectrum. That might be a better way to look at it. For example, when you're sitting there and your eyes are open and you're taking in what's in front of you visually, well, there are these fluctuations and changes going on within your field of consciousness related to what your eyes see, what you are perceiving. The moment you close your eyes, just the simple act of closing your eyes automatically ends certain fluctuations within the field of consciousness, these fluctuations related to the visual sense. However, you can't simply just close your eyes and experience the promise of yoga, enlightenment, clarity. There's a bit more to it than that. But the simple act of closing your eyes begins the process. So if we're looking at this spectrum of nirodha, that simple act of sitting still, turning within, and closing your eyes, automatically certain fluctuations within the field of your awareness become less. So it might not seem like much, but just that act alone starts this experience of nirodha. But Patanjali, again, he's talking about a lot more than simply closing your eyes. And that's where the role of meditation comes in. When you are focused on a mantra, when you're doing your best to hold your attention on this word phrase with devotion, paying attention to the meaning, the experience of it, well, automatically, by focusing on that mantra, you stop focusing on at least 20 other things. So immediately, you are perpetuating this lessening of vrittis, these lessening of other waves within the field of your consciousness. Your mind becomes less choppy. The waves begin to diminish. And in the beginning of that process, you might not do a very good job. But every single moment that you are able to bring your awareness back to the mantra, well then, these other waves become less powerful. And we have to remember that Nirodha is a saṁskāra. And what does that mean? Well, again, this is another term that we're going to have to explore because I think it's essential to know how to put all this puzzle together, this puzzle of enlightenment together. But this is a subliminal groove, a subliminal aspect of your consciousness. It's something that happens under the surface of your conscious awareness, usually. Okay, so this is what happens when we think of Nirodha as this saṁskāra. Now, usually, most of our experience has a particular subliminal activator in effect, but that is an outward-looking activator. I think it's called a Vyutthāna Saṁskāra. It's outward-looking. That's when you're defining yourself by the things in the world. And that can be anything from the apple in your hand to something that you're worried about, to a relationship, anything that pulls you out into the world, away from yourself as the seer, as the soul, as a divine expression. That is a Vyutthāna Saṁskāra. And that's a habit, that's a groove that is going on almost all of the time. But now what we're trying to do with our yoga practice is to introduce this Nirodha Saṁskāra. And every single time you bring your awareness back to a mantra, even if you fail 30 times, that split second when you're able to focus on it, that adds a drop in the bucket of this Nirodha Saṁskāra. So every second that you do it, there's another drop in the bucket. And so this power of Nirodha begins to increase. It might just be one drop at a time, but still, one drop in a bucket over several hours eventually does add up. And so what we see is through our practice, as we continue to close our eyes, to sit up straight, to direct our awareness within, every split second that we focus on the mantra, we are building up this momentum towards more fully internalizing our awareness. And we are creating this subliminal pattern such that it becomes easier and easier to direct our awareness within. However, we have to really try to do this. That's why you have to be engaged in your practice. You can't do it mechanically. You can't do it just to relax and to fall asleep. You have to be really focused on what you're doing. The same is true with pranayama, whether it's alternate nostril breathing, or Kriya pranayama, or bee breath, or other forms of pranayama. The moment that you close your eyes and you begin to sink your awareness into the breath, the movement of the breath, and that means to watch it very intently, not with stress. You're not stressing yourself out by watching it. You're just being curious about it. You're taking an interest in it. You're observing, what does it feel like as the breath flows in through my nostrils? Well, the very moment that you spend about 5 seconds wondering, what does the breath feel like as it flows into my nostrils during pranayama, you've just added about 5 drops into the bucket of your Nirodha subliminal unconscious tendency. And sometimes it takes several years, but in the Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship Program, I encourage students to have a journal so that they can see, okay, this is how I started meditation. And maybe 3 or 4 months go by and they say, well, it's working pretty well, but I don't know. But when they look back at the end of the program, which is a 2-year program, and they see how their time has increased, how their capacity to focus has increased, how they've been able to fully internalize their awareness quite a bit more, that journal helps them to keep track of something which is really an unconscious process. They see how their capacity for Nirodha, this ending or ceasing of the fluctuations within the field of their consciousness, how over time it grows, it becomes more active. So the thing about Nirodha is that you can't necessarily observe it directly, but you can observe its effect. You can observe how it is actually happening for you behind the scenes. Now there's something called a nirodha-pariṇāma. Pariṇāma, another word we're going to have to explore in detail. That means a transformation, a change. And so one thing you can observe yourself when you're meditating is that change, that transformation, when you notice, instead of being pulled out into your worries, into the things of the world, into the things you want to accomplish, instead of being pulled outward, all of a sudden you notice that your mind just wants to really focus on that mantra, or it just wants to focus on that pranayama. And the moment you notice that, you are witnessing the nirodha-pariṇāma. It's almost like you're witnessing how the more subtler levels are shifting gear. Whereas before, you tend to be distracted outwards. All of a sudden you realize, wow, I want to focus on this mantra. I want to explore my breath. And you let go of these external distractions. So you see, this idea of nirodha, it's subtle, it's abstract, and it's easy to miss because you have to pay attention to the effects of it happening. It's not something you can necessarily observe directly. Now, as you become more skillful in your yoga practice, as you become more and more internalized, eventually, yes, you can perceive this directly. But it's something that is happening even for a beginner meditator. In an instant that within your meditation practice, you have spent 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or even a minute engaged in what you've chosen to focus on, your mantra, your pranayama, your point of devotion. In every little instant that happens, nirodha is growing, which means that you are beginning to build up this capacity, this momentum to fulfilling the purpose of the yoga of enlightenment. Nirodha is occurring, and slowly, wave by wave, these vrittis, these fluctuations are becoming less. Chitta is becoming clearer, more sattvic, lighter, more observant. And this capacity for nirodha begins to build upon itself. And so what happens as this capacity for nirodha grows? Well, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali says that as this occurs, we begin to abide in our own true nature, our own eternal nature as the seer, as the soul, as the expression of divinity. We feel it. And this is why meditation and our meditation practices, engaging them with curiosity and attention, is so important, because as you begin to feel, recognize that you are the seer, the eternal witness, the soul, peace naturally reveals itself. A sense of inner wisdom and intuition naturally comes forth, because that is the nature. That is the nature of experiencing the sattva, the clarity, the light that is so close to the soul, so close to the seer. And when we don't do this, again considering the Yoga Sutras, what happens when we don't do this? Well, then Patanjali reveals to us Sutra 1.4, vritti sarupyam itaratra, vritti sarupyam itaratra, vritti, those fluctuations, sarupyam, it's referring to our seer, our self, our soul again, and then itaratra, interesting word, I always like that word, it's fun to say when you can say it right. That word means otherwise. And I think that's neat, because if you ever think about the word iteration, meaning like another development, it seems to me that these two words are related. Itaratra, iteration, another iteration. So when you are not abiding as the self, essentially you are defining yourself through other things, through other vrittis, through other changes, fluctuations, ideas, circumstances. And what happens when we do that? Well, then we step back on the wheel of pleasure and pain, hot and cold, ups and downs, change, transformation. And that wheel never stops. in the sense that what goes up must come down. So even if you are really trying to support these positive vrittis, which is good, we should certainly put our attention towards positive, lighter, buoyant vrittis, fluctuations, and definitions. We should fill our mind with beautiful things. Later on in the Yoga Sutras, when we talk about the idea of citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ, what is that doing? That's making the mind beautiful. And why do we need to do that? Because you can't really meditate very well. It's very difficult to feel safe and content to explore the higher realities within, or the clarity of your being within, if your mind is not beautiful. So this is why even in yoga practice, it's not simply about sitting down and just doing the discipline of a particular mantra or pranayama. We have to do other things too. We have to find ways to make our mind beautiful, clear, serene. And it's the citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ practice that adds to that, but that's later on in the Yoga Sutras. And I believe you can go back and re-listen to podcast 4 of this particular season, the infinite season. So it's podcast 4, IS4, a few podcasts back, where I discuss these things. But anyway, when we are not abiding as the self, as the seer, when we are not feeling, experiencing that clarity of the soul, we're defined by other things, which means eventually we're going to experience pain of some sort, because the changing definitions of life, the wheel of life is up and down, always up and down. So we keep meditating to still these waves, these fluctuations within our mind, within our field of being, so that we can perceive, experience very clearly that eternal, timeless, serene, intuitive, and wise nature that is our very self. We become the seer. And later on in chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali tells us how do we achieve Nirodha? How do we perpetuate this in our experience? And he says that it occurs through practice and detachment. Through practice and detachment. And that's why all authentic enlightenment teachers and traditions recommend that you have a daily practice of meditation, where you sit down at the same time every day, or twice a day if you can, and you work out your consciousness or your field of consciousness. You practice the exercises which give you the glimpses of stillness. And in time, once you work through some of the other subliminal tendencies you might have, because that's the thing we have to remember about yoga and meditation, is that it's encouraging us to experience subtler and subtler states of our being. And if under the surface we have anxieties, fears, depressions, anger, and these sorts of things, we're going to see those things. And so we do need to be aware of that and have other support systems to work through it. Now, the relaxation responsive meditation in yoga, that will naturally help you to release your attachment to anger, to release your attachment to anxiety, to depression, to greed, to attachment, and so on. But you might also have to address those things with counselors or therapists, so you don't waste all your time hoping that it's going to be meditation that corrects it for you. But once again, you can refer to the citta-vṛtti-nirodhaḥ practice. That is a specific practice to help you work through those deeper levels of your consciousness on your own to the best of your ability. But otherwise, every day, being very curious about how can I close my eyes, turn off all those vrittis and those fluctuations from the visual field? How can I go in my little private space where I meditate, focus on my body, focus on my breath, turn my awareness within, and choose to let go of all of my general distractions, those things that I generally define myself through. And this is part of the practice. This is part of where Patanjali says that we have to engage in detachment to experience Nirodha. What do? Well, when you sit down, you can look around inside your field of consciousness. You can look around inside your mind and your emotions, and you can say, well, what am I defined by? And there's all kinds of things that you can define yourself by. Maybe you're attached to your friends. Maybe you define yourself as a good father. Or maybe you define yourself through the work that you do or the money that you have. Or maybe you define yourself through your ill health, or you define yourself through your good health. Well, you have to admit that. And then as you begin the practice, say, just for now, just for the next 30 minutes or an hour, I'm not going to define myself through that. I'm not even going to worry about it. Now, it will have a momentum, meaning it will keep popping back up in your awareness. But every single time you decide, you know what, I'm just going to let that go for now. And you just breathe and let it float away, or you just simply return your awareness back to the mantra or to the pranayama. Well, you are strengthening once again that nirodha subliminal activator, that subliminal tendency, and you are lessening, you are allowing these psychological tendencies to define yourself by other things, situations, and people to recede. You can still love your family, your friends, your job, the things that you're attached to, but not while you're meditating. While you're meditating, let that go. When you come back to meditation, that's fine. Then you can, again, participate in your relationships appropriately. But for this to work, you really have to take the time and give it a shot such that you do become very clear on what are you attached to, how do you define yourself. And during that process of meditation, during that short amount of time in your day, you let those things go completely. You do whatever it takes. Now, as I've mentioned, this will be hard because you've got a lot of momentum to holding on to these attachments. But with practice, by choosing to let go of them, you're letting them recede during your meditation. And by letting them recede and flow away during your meditation, you are encouraging, you are allowing this power of nirodha to come in, such that all these fluctuations, everything that comes in and out of your field of awareness becomes calmer, stiller, and clearer. And those of you who are very devotional or appreciate devotion, it's going to be in those moments of stillness where you feel like you are having a God communion experience, or you're having communion with divinity. But you're only going to be able to do that to the degree that you are able to let go of your attachment to other things. And it is your practice which empowers, fuels this capacity to let go of other things. If you want to know what it's like to abide in a sense of divinity, a sense of stillness, a sense of safety, a sense of, again, intuitive awareness and wisdom, well, you have to let go of all the other things that pull your energy. You have to let go of all the other things that you keep defining yourself by. And during the time of meditation, the only thing you define yourself by is your inner light, your inner stillness, the capacity to abide as the seer, as the witness, as the eternal soul, which transcends all duality. And you work towards it. In the beginning, you just simply affirm it. You might not feel it. You might think, well, this isn't true. This is kind of silly what I'm doing here. But the very fact that you spend some time imagining that it is possible for you to abide in that state of clarity, or that it is possible for you to recognize your eternal, timeless nature, just the act of intending, of recognizing, of imagining that's starting to move you in that direction. And then as you become more successful with the process of yoga, as your subliminal tendency towards nirodha, the stilling of the fluctuations within the field of your consciousness, as this grows, as this becomes more powerful, then the experience becomes real. And it's in those moments where you go, wow, this stuff actually does work. This is amazing. And it's in those moments that you want to keep practicing. You find that inspiration, you find that drive. So yes, in the beginning, you might simply be overcoming some inertia, some doubt. You might really simply have to sit down and just try to breathe and focus on your meditation. It might be very mechanical in the beginning. That's normal and that's natural. It's not true for everyone. Someone might just be extremely inspired from the beginning. But if you find yourself in that state where it seems like it's a struggle, that's normal. Why? Because you haven't cultivated nirodha yet. You don't have a whole lot of drops in the bucket towards the stilling of these fluctuations within the field of your consciousness. But if you stay with it through practice and through detachment, if you stay with it, that bucket gets fuller and fuller and fuller until eventually it overflows. And then when you sit down and meditate, it's easy. You just close your eyes, you begin your Kriya pranayama, or you begin your mantra, or you begin your devotional practice, and that momentum towards Nirodha is just like a tidal wave that washes over you. And whereas before, the tidal wave that washed over you was pulling you out to sea, to get distracted, to be pulled into all of the fragmented aspects of your life where you want to do this, feel that, experience that, be with that person, avoid this, where that was the tidal wave that was washing over you. Well, that has calmed down. That has been stilled. Those subliminal tendencies have receded, and so they're not very powerful anymore. And then you're able to abide in this seer state, this pristine state of your soul, of the witness, of the eternal nature of your being. All right, so these are some ideas about what Nirodha is. Again, you're going to notice the effects of it. And it's something that you have to strengthen. It's something that you have to, through your meditation practice, cultivate. And we have to remember that it functions on a very subtle level of your field of being. So it's not necessarily obvious. It's something that you notice the results of. In a way, it could be compared to changing your diet. As you start to change your diet from maybe a lot of junk food or a really meat-based diet to a more plant-based, cleaner diet, well, the day that you make the change, you're not immediately going to experience the positive benefit of it. But as the weeks and months go by and as the years go by, you'll notice the positive changes. And so that's how this Nirodha process works in yoga. The changes occur subtly, slowly, behind the scenes. And as you look back over your time meditating and practicing meditation and yoga, you begin to appreciate the positive force of Nirodha. And from my perspective, it's really fascinating to watch because I've seen the process work in my own life, in my own practice, but I've also had the good fortune to observe many, many students over the course of several years, how they describe the changes in their inner states, in their inner light, in their inner stillness, how they describe that as they look back over the years, they're surprised at how far they've come. I see it a little more clearly because I'm not always with them, which means that, for example, when they write to me or they send me a homework assignment or they show up for a retreat, I see them then. And then I might not hear from them or see them for another month or 2 months or even half a year or so. But then they come back again for a retreat and I get to see the changes. And to me, it's obvious because I remember my experience with them quite a few months ago, but they have been with themselves every single day and every single second. So they didn't quite see the change as drastically as I do. And this is what you're going to find to be your experience as you continue to grow and to change. That's why it's important to keep a meditation journal if you can, to keep track of how long you've meditated, the techniques you use, what your experiences are. And then every 6 months, every year, 2 years or so, look back and observe those changes. And it's going to be in those moments of observation where you recognize, oh, okay, Nirodha has been in effect. My field of consciousness, my vrittis are stiller. I notice I am more self-aware, self with a capital S. I notice that when I read the Yoga Sutras or the Bhagavad Gita or I listen to spiritual lectures, they actually make quite a bit more sense to me. And this is all because of the power of Nirodha. So let me know what your experience has been exploring this topic. Leave a comment within the podcast or shoot me an email. Do you understand Nirodha better now? Do you see how it fits into the larger scheme of your lifelong yoga practice, your meditation practice? And then finally, let me know honestly if you feel it would be helpful to explore these terms within the Yoga Sutras, term by term, principle by principle, so that when you read the Yoga Sutras, you have all the puzzle pieces there and you can put it all together to see the bigger picture of the process. So once again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. And before I go, I'd like to encourage you to visit the Kriya Yoga Alliance, kriyayogaalliance.com. As of this recording, there are several Kriya Yoga teachers, students of Roy Eugene Davis, again, who studied with Paramahansa Yogananda, who offer weekly Sunday services. And during those Sunday services, there's a talk, an inspirational talk, followed by a guided meditation within the Kriya Yoga tradition. Otherwise, I'll see you next time, and I look forward to your feedback and your comments on this particular episode. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kriya Yoga Podcast. To learn more about Kriya Yoga meditation, you can visit us at kriyayogaonline.com, where you can find information about current book releases, online classes, and in-person retreats throughout the year. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, visit us at the Kriya Yoga Online Patreon community at patreon.com/kriyayoga.